it's something that I want to clear up too, because he said in a couple of interviews, like, all we did was fight and fuck. And it's like, that's not true. And to me, that feels kind of dismissive of me and our relationship and the experiment as a whole once again. But
all right, I'd like to welcome to the Love in Reality podcast from Love is Blind Season 9. Madison, how are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely enamored to chat with you. Obviously, we talked a little bit about it before we got on the air, but we spoke for a very brief time during the junket for Love is Blind, which was very exciting because obviously that's your first foray into this press style world. So, that leads to the first question. What made you want to sign up for Love is Blind?
So I've watched the show since season 1, and I've always just loved the experiment. I think it's so fascinating. And, with my eye condition, I was like, gosh, this is like the perfect opportunity for me to really experience what my life could be if I were to lose my vision and how I'd interact with a partner. Obviously, if I did lose my vision, you do have, physical touch, which you don't have in the pods, but it was something that I was excited to kind of get a sense for in the pods.
Yeah, obviously one of the things that I think that was almost like it's almost it's not the same thing, but like the equivalent, like Jordan bringing up his kid, you know what I mean? It was almost like your eye condition, like I need you to be aware of this in case this is in the future. So was that something that you brought up early on in the pods to who you dated?
I think in the pods, with Joe specifically, it came up maybe on day 3 or 4. It's something that, yes, it's a big part of my life, but it's also not my defining characteristic, right? So it's something that I want to be upfront with and something to talk about with, but it wasn't something I felt like I needed to bring up right away. Something that's interesting, actually, and I wish that you'd seen more of my journey in the pods, is on a different date that I had. We were playing like a would you rather game. And the first question that my date picked happened to be, would you rather go blind or deaf? And I was like, there is no way that this is just coincidental. I was like, pull out every single card and tell me if they're all the same one, So it was kind of interesting the way that it came up. My eye condition came up in different dates.
That is hilarious. You're like, was this planted? Like, what's going on here? But it's
like,
also like a very basic question at the same time. You know what I mean? So
totally. It was like serendipitous. It was like the universe, like, okay, now is your moment.
I love that. All right, talk to me about the pods a little bit. Was it just Joe? Was there anybody else that kind of caught your attention, or you dated longer in the process?
So I actually went to proposal day with 2 people that you don't see. I was very adamant about not breaking things off with other connections. I wanted to be 100% sure when I said yes to a proposal that I had explored every avenue and that I was making the right decision. So I did go to proposal day with 2 other people, and Joe was actually my number 5 on day 1, and he slowly climbed the ranks. It was funny. I remember one day we were talking, and I kind of made a joke to Joe, and I was like, I know we weren't each other's number 1, but like I really love where we are now. And he was like, no, Madison, you've been my number 1 since day 1. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Reveal who those other people were, or would you rather just keep it to yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to reveal, my number 1 day 1 was actually Blake. He's just an incredible guy, good person. And then a couple of other people that you don't see on the show. Actually, the person I went to proposal day with, you don't even see on the show at all. So, I could say their name, but nobody would know who they are.
Absolutely, yes. So talk to me about Joe, right? Talk to me about what was it about him that obviously now I know, went from 5 to 1. How did that kind of navigate in your head, and what made him stand out?
So, my typical type is somebody that is very like outgoing, very like vivacious, very, very similar to me, honestly. I like somebody that's intense and passionate. And Joe is a little bit more in the pods, a little more subdued. He kind of had a little bit more of like a quiet tone, a little bit more of like a grounding energy. And, as I'm doing these interviews, because, we're interviewing all the time after all these dates. So I'm doing my interviews and I'm going on and on about all my different connections. And I remember my producer being like, and I'm like, and who else? And they're like, you have another one. And I'm like, oh, Joe, of course. And so I kind of, right then, it was like a light bulb moment where I was like, maybe I need to pay more attention to this connection because this is very different from my typical. In the pods, Joe is very consistent. He was very about me. I mean, he even he even actually cut off all of his other connections, I think on day 3 or 4, maybe day 4. And I told him, I was the one saying, like, no, don't cut off other connections. Like, really explore this so that you are 100% when, proposal day comes. So, I think what ultimately kind of had him climbing the ranks was just that consistency and that grounding energy that I really hadn't experienced and was really looking for.
I like that. Yeah. So let's talk about the reveal a little bit, right? Obviously, you lived it. You know what I mean? And talk to me about that feeling of living in that moment and your nerves, the conversation. How did it feel to you?
So this is an incredible thing to go through. It is so, so nerve wracking. I mean, you're literally thrown into this room. It's like, okay, you're going to stand in front of the door. You're going to see flashing lights. They're going to open. You don't know when. And you're going through all of the emotions that you felt in the pods. You're thinking through, is this going to translate? How do I show up so that they feel that I'm translating the same way from the pods to real life? So when the doors open, I was really like, I'm so excited to bring the connection from the pods to real life and really let him feel my essence that he felt in the pods in front of him. So that's already going through my mind, right? And people are saying to me, like, how did you not know right then and there? Honestly, how could I? It's like I'm in my own head. I'm nervous. He's nervous. This is not a normal situation. So, I'll never get out of my head when the doors open and it was just like deer in headlights look from him. Um, I did feel that he was a little bit, and I say this in a deleted scene actually, where I'm like, you seemed a little spastic. It was a little intense, which I understood. I totally give grace on that. I felt the same way. But I think that right then I started to feel something wasn't right. And I was kind of ignoring my intuition because I'm thinking to myself, this is a hard thing. There are cameras everywhere. I understand that this is abnormal. And so I was giving grace throughout the whole process. But really in the reveal, it just felt chaotic. I felt like I was having to all of a sudden be the grounding energy that I had felt from him in the pods. And I felt like I was trying to continue that connection. And it kind of felt to me like the cord was ripped right then.
Let's talk about taking the engagement, obviously, to Mexico, right? So talk to me about those early stages and getting to know each other on a more physical level and stuff like that.
Early stages, it was chaotic again. It was kind of like we get to Mexico, we hadn't seen each other for 2 days since the reveal. And when he actually came to get into the car with me to drive up to the resort, he didn't even like look at me. He was like talking to like the crew. Like it was almost like he didn't recognize me. And I'm like, hey, and he's like, oh, hey, like kind of like, I'm like, hey, So when we actually got into our room in Mexico, I think that there was a lot of nerves for both of us. I think that we were both feeling like, wow, this is crazy. This is really intense. Being in front of each other, I was feeling the disconnect for sure. Like I was definitely like, is this the same person? Are we still feeling the same things? There's so many things that are just unknown that you really can't, obviously watching it back, I know so much more now, but in those moments, it's so hard to differentiate what is a symptom of the experiment, nerves, cameras, and what is a symptom of somebody's character. So as far as being in front of each other, I think there was a lot of nerves, a lot of trying to kind of put pieces together.
Yeah, because obviously the fight. I've seen you talk about it. That whole situation was crazy to me. It almost there was an element there as a viewer. It's like, man, I really almost was like rooting for you to just be like, all right, I'm out of here. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's as somebody watching it. But as you transition back into the real world, it almost felt like you two were never finding your footing from what we saw. Right? You even often call them out for that as well. Did this start taking a toll on you?
Absolutely. I mean, I was exhausted. It's like I'm getting moments of connection and moments of feeling that reassurance and moments of feeling like I'm with my person. And then all of a sudden it'd be a 180 switch and I'm not in that comfortable, like lovey space anymore. What you really see in me throughout the season, unfortunately, is me operating from a place of insecurity because I'm wanting the reassurance. I'm wanting in a very short time span, are we in this together and are we at the same level? And it absolutely was very difficult for me to operate from the place that I usually do, which is a place of self-assurance, a place of confidence, and really be able to be my truest self because I constantly felt like I was on eggshells and constantly unsure.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of people like criticize that aspect of not just you, but also like Annie as well. Like, oh, I
Mhm.
need that in reassurance. I need that reassurance. And to me, when I watch it, it's like, all right, so they're not getting this off screen.
Mhm.
So, maybe if I announce it on, it's like almost that balance of like maybe, hey, if I let people, hey, I'm not getting this reassurance from you. Can you give it to me? And
Mhm.
that also speaks to maybe past relationships and past trauma and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard. Relationships are really difficult. People are so different, and something that I also want to bring up as far as the Mexico fight. It's like my dad struggled with some addiction, and so with me growing up, I saw that in my father. And so that's something that I've actually not talked about before. And I kind of had a conversation with my mom, and she was like, Madison, I think a big reason that you didn't leave is because it felt familiar. And I 100% concur with that, because when you grow up and you're seeing your parental figure or somebody that's caring for you in a similar kind of state, it doesn't feel scary when you see it in person. And so I think that, for viewers to be like, gosh, I really wish you would have just left. It's like, I wish I would have too in hindsight, but it was something that was familiar to me. And while it was, yes, scary in that moment, it was also something that wasn't like, oh, I can't work through this.
Absolutely. That's powerful to understand. That's why to me it's like unpacking Madison, the person in these
Yeah.
interviews is really important to me because we get 10, 12, 13 episodes of seeing just these clippets all together of these individuals. So it's nice to hear more of a backstory. But obviously we as a viewer as see kind of wishy-washy Joe is what I call them on my podcast, but we see wishy-washy Joe, even to the point, in my opinion, where we see this level of excitement from you so many different times because of the good, right? So even to the point where he's like, hey, I want to put a baby you in me to like, again, saying something like that means I'm committed to the process. I'm committed to everything because putting a baby, that's serious. You know what I mean? Like that's not just talk to me about some of the good that maybe we didn't see.
Yeah. I feel like there were definitely moments off camera that I was getting that reassurance. I mean, we were definitely intimate, we were physically connected, and that's something that's been very hard, is everyone saying, girl, he's just not into you, he's just not attracted to you. And watching it back, I'm like, yeah, I would get that same sense as well. But living it, how confusing for me when I'm getting these nuggets of connection. We're intimate. I mean, he would come back from work, would be going to film. He'd be like, "Oh, you look beautiful, Madison." So it was never a question in my mind of if he was or wasn't attracted to me. And I'm also very much a big words of affirmation person, and so it's like I say this in my deleted scene where I'm like, I like the pretty words. So when people are seeing me be needy or clingy, it's like, no, that's just like my love language. And that was also like I was giving a lot of that verbally. And so I was kind of wanting that reciprocated. And Joe was good at that at times. There were definitely moments that I felt like he was giving me the reassurance that I wanted. Other things that were good in our relationship, like I think that we did have fun, like we did laugh, like we have very similar senses of humor. Unfortunately, this experiment lends itself to kind of putting your walls up in some ways, because it's so vulnerable that you don't get to really explore the fun as much with, well, I guess if somebody isn't as in it as you are, you know what I mean? But we really did have similar senses of humor. And it's something that I want to clear up too, because he said in a couple of interviews, like, all we did was fight and fuck, and it's like, that's not true. And to me, that feels kind of dismissive of me and our relationship, and the experiment as a whole once again. But there were good parts of the relationship, or I wouldn't have stayed in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, there's you have limits. You know what I mean? Like you have limits to the point of like if there's not that reassurance, even this late in the game when we're having the mixer, because that is late in the game. You know what I mean? I think it's like 10 days prior to the wedding.
Mhm.
If a man and or woman, whatever, I want you to put a baby in me, or hey, I'm gonna put a baby. That to me is a serious sign. In 10 days, I'm saying yes at the altar, right? You know what I mean? So in my head, I'm sure in your head, you kind of
Mhm.
were feeling the same things. Obviously, the day of the dress try on you were on cloud nine, right? As you should be. You know what I mean? As you should be. You looked gorgeous. You looked beautiful. You were ready to dress the night. I didn't realize until obviously I heard in a recent interview that you didn't know that he walked out on the tux fitting and you were all at like a little mix and mingle that night, right?
Yeah, I had no idea that he had left tux fitting. I actually, the day before, had done a private dress fitting with my friends and family. And, I told him all about it, how excited I was, how I couldn't wait for him to do his tux fitting because it made me feel even more sure. So then obviously I do this beautiful dress fitting with the girls on screen. And afterwards, they actually kept me later to finish like my dress measurements and everything. And they said that they were going to interview me. And so I was literally on set while they're packing out. Like I'm like waiting, until probably 8:30 or 9, I would guess. And then I was like, okay, this isn't happening. I'm going to go home. So I texted Joe and I said, where are you? Like, are you at home? Like, how did it go? I can't wait to hear about it. And he's like, oh, some of us are going out. And it was like me, him. Well, I went back home and changed. And then I met up with him at the bar. It was me, him. I want to say one other couple, honestly, but I don't remember at this point because I went back and looked at the photos and it was almost like it was me, him, his groomsmen, and then a whole bunch of singles. So yeah, nobody told me. I wish that there would have been like, hey, Madison, let's talk tonight. He had every opportunity to tell production, hey, production, I need to talk to Madison. If we have to do this on camera, so be it. I think that would have been a little bit more admirable than just letting things go, letting me come to a bar, letting me stand there and show my dress photos to the singles, to his groomsmen, telling them that I want to marry him, telling them that I want to be with him. All the while, there's this secret of he just stormed out. And yeah.
Yeah, even with his because even if his groomsmen are there, they were at the fitting as well, which makes it even more just absolutely bonkers.
And I understand, like, from their standpoint, like, I would be so mad if my girls were like, oh, by the way, so it's like I totally understand from their standpoint, just trying to stay out of it. But at the end of the day, we were in a relationship and it falls on him to communicate and it falls on him to take the proper steps to handle things in, I would say, a respectful way.
Yeah, obviously, I know you guys had that conversation that night, and I know that you guys kind of had another conversation for the cameras as well. But talk to me about that conversation that we didn't see, and what was kind of going through your head and in those moments.
Well, I first want to clear up, people are thinking that we had to do it for the cameras. That wasn't necessarily what happened. What really happened was after the outing, we went to another cast member's house. We all hung out there. We end up coming back. I'm kind of in my head, I'm starting to really be like, what is going on? Like where, like for once and for all, I need to know. And I know I'm not going to get those answers on camera. So we come back to the apartment. It's probably 2 or 3 in the morning. And I have like a real sit down, come to Jesus moment with him. And I'm like, look, Joe, I want to jump. If you jump, I'll jump. And this was probably a good like 40 minute conversation. And I said, I love you. I care about you. And I need you to understand that you and I are forever going to be tethered as Madison and Joe season 9. Like that's not going away anytime soon. So I need to know exactly where you are, what you're feeling. And his face kind of dropped and he was like, I've never heard you talk like this. I'm like, I feel like I try to talk with you like this, but so his face kind of dropped and he said, Madison, like you're not it. Like I'm going to say no at the altar. And I was like, okay. All right. So we were supposed to go to brunch with my mom and sister the next day. We're both kind of crying, like we're cuddling each other, like just like this is crazy. And then the next morning, my producer calls to go over the schedule for the rest of the week, and he could hear that I'd been crying. So one of the producers, literally 5 minutes later, bang, bang, bang on the door. They come in. They're telling us to be on ice, separate. Don't talk until the cameras are there. And I'm hysterical. I'm crying. I'm like, I'm not gonna get a conversation if the cameras are here. Like we've talked about this very briefly, but like we both had to go to sleep. It wasn't like we had a end all be all conversation. And so at that point, I'm starting to be like, okay, is this something that we can date outside of this? Can we explore each other? Is this something that we can see outside of the cameras? And so that's what I want to clear up, is that it wasn't having to redo it for the cameras by any means. It was a continuation of the conversation because we were separated. So we had some conversation that morning, and then we stopped filming. I refused to put on a microphone because I was like, I don't know if we're going to go talk at a coffee shop or something and put a bow on this or what the deal is, So we ended up stopping filming that morning. I slept. I was so tired. I slept. My family came and, took care of me that morning. And then we finished filming that night. So what you actually see is that night, that entire scene is the next night after.
Yeah, it's a good follow up because something you said there interesting. So, did you guys attempt to explore the relationship post breakup?
No, we didn't. We did see each other once outside of it. It was an attempt for me to try to just have a normal conversation or try to kind of put this into a box. Excuse me. Try to put this into a box so that we can move forward and, be amicable now that it's all out. And it didn't really go anywhere. It was a weird situation. We did kiss and we started kind of making out, and then Joe started tearing up, and I was like, what is this? What are these emotions? And he's like, I don't know, that was weird. So there was not any exploring outside of the experiment.
Yeah, where do you guys kind of stand right now?
I don't have any animosity towards him. I wish him well. Do I wish he wasn't in my orbit? Absolutely. I think that's a normal feeling to have after a breakup or, in my case, a failed engagement. You know, we are just absolutely not each other's people. And watching it back, he did me a huge, huge favor. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But where we are now, we are in similar social circles. So I do see him from time to time, and we're able to just say, hey, how are you? But he might be the best guy, but he's not my fucking guy.
I love that. I love that. Obviously, that's one of the things that's interesting, right? Because of how you went through the experiment. You guys go through it, over a year ago, and you kind of have to live with that and then relive it. So, what's it been like reliving it and watching it back?
It's been very emotional. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a deep feeler. I'm an intense person, and I really do feel everything, and that's how I process. Um, there's been high highs and low lows. There's been moments that I've been like, yeah, like that was an incredible journey, and like I am forever thankful for doing this with him and doing this experiment. But there was moments watching it back that were really painful. Watching my reveal, I had to pause it probably 3 or 4 times. My mom and I watched it together privately. And, I was crying a number of times because it is worst case scenario to have the person that you emotionally connect with say the things that he said about me in such a careless way. Seeing it pieced together in a way that makes the picture so much more clear for me has been very painful. I think that there was a lot more that could have been done on his end to be a little bit more respectful. So it's been hard. It's been definitely very difficult, but I'm very thankful that I have an incredible support system. I've got a great therapist, and this was a year and a half ago, so it's like I already processed all of this, and it kind of reopens the wound. But thankfully, I'm doing well now. Truly, I'm thriving. So.